really have to say. Okay.
Tansy, Anine, Boujou, hello. I am Tammy Wolf, the host and creator of Truth Before Reconciliation. Thank you so much, Niigaan Sinclair, for being here with me today. I want to welcome Niigaan. He is a professor at the University of Manitoba. He's an Anishinaabe from Peguis. And he also has a new book out, Winnipeg, that is coming out May 30th of 2024. I'm sure many of you know who Niigaan is. He was actually named by Maclean's as one of the most influential individuals in Canada. So I'm really excited to have you here today, Niigaan. So welcome. I thought maybe we would start by just letting you kind of introduce yourself for maybe the small demographic of people that might not know who you are.
Oh, I'm sure that's more than a small, but bonjour, everyone. Bonjour, it's nice to see everyone. I'm happy to be here and especially happy to support your podcast, Tammy, because not only are you an amazing student and writer and researcher yourself, but I really appreciate someone who works in research and then also works in the public and especially tries to make these very complicated issues understandable for our people. And I think that that's something I've tried to strive for in my career. I've never tried to be someone who writes an essay that only 4 people will read. I've always wanted to write work and create work and deliver work that will benefit our people, which naturally means that it has to be something for the public, which a podcast certainly is. So miigwech for having me.
Thanks so much, Niigaan. So let's just get right into it. I wanted to start by kind of looking at this era of truth and reconciliation that we're in. So it has been a buzzword, really kind of moving towards reconciliation, right? You hear a lot in the media, you hear a lot in different systems about reconciliation, especially after the TRC report and the 94 calls to action. It's been almost 10 years since those things have been released. And with this heavy focus of reconciliation, do you feel that we're still in the era of truth?
Oh, we're not even close to reconciliation. Like reconciliation isn't even, I don't think anyone in the country other than perhaps our people and in
Right.
particular moments and I would call it kind of instance of reconciliation. So you'll see it.
Right.
Uh, you'll see like an image of it, or you'll see a moment in which a group of people come together. But we're not in any way at a stage of reconciliation. We are very much at the truth phase. And because I think that we have a general, well, 150 years of misunderstanding. So
Right.
therefore, we shouldn't be surprised when there is a broad scale misunderstanding of really basic issues in the public. And I was recently at a very big public event where there's just some basic misunderstandings of like who Indigenous peoples are,
Right.
what is it, the lands that we're on, what is the treaty that we're on, and these are by like major, powerful, influential people in Canadian society, people who have benefited tremendously by colonialism, people who have inherited lands that were stolen and given to their ancestors. People who come to power and make tremendously influential decisions on
Right.
Indigenous peoples, and then just to have basic misunderstandings or basic ignorances. And at the worst of that, it is a willful ignorance. It is, I don't want to know more. I don't want to do anything about it. I don't want to learn. I don't want to read. Or they say things even worse, which is the worst part of this, which is, I'm sick and tired of hearing about this.
Right.
Haven't we done all the work already? Haven't we heard all the truth already? And one of the dangerous things about the all the commissions, Royal Commission as well, the Truth and Reconciliation
Right.
Commission. I would say also the Murder, Missing, Indigenous Women and Girls Inquiry, all the way back to the Bagot Commission, decades and decades ago, the Hawthorne Commission in the 1970s. Like
Right.
all of those different studies always kind of give Canada breathing room. They give them like this. So, we studied the issue. Oh, we talked about it for a few minutes,
Mm-hmm.
and then, oh, now aren't we done now? And the problem is that, of course, Every single one of those commissions, even the really racist ones going back to the 1840s, 1850s, that studied Indigenous peoples and said really basic things like Indigenous peoples are mistreated or treated badly, or like even the ones like the Hawthorne Commission, which talks about Indigenous peoples have suffered innately under Canadian settlement and therefore have to have their rights recognized. Like none of that means reconciliation. It's just saying, okay, here's a truth, and
Right.
keep repeating that truth, I think, until basic parameters of society, like parliament or a company or a school, until they stop debating it, and then they go, okay, let's talk about what it means. And I'll give you just one more example before we start. So we're still debating. It's now going on the third anniversary of the potential unmarked graves at
Right.
Kamloops, at Cowessus, at Brandon. Thousands of children went missing during the residential school period, and they were never found. There was
Right.
potential grave sites that were uncovered a few years ago at Kamloops. Much attention was paid to the potentiality of uh, anomalies in the soil at the former
Right.
site of the Kamloops Residential School. And so everybody jumped to saying at mass graves, unmarked burial grounds. Like it potentially could be those things. We don't know, because these things take decades upon decades to uncover. And so people want to call that a hoax now because we haven't come up with bodies and skeletal remains, right? And
Right.
there's a really big piece in a very right-wing newspaper, national newspaper today. Oh, this thing's a hoax. Oh, this thing is like not true. Or this thing, oh, people blew it out of proportion. Children died.
Right.
Period. Period. We like, what else do we need to debate? Like whether it's in those unmarked graves or anomalies. Like I think we should search for them. Should there be outrage about children dead? Yes.
Right.
Period. Let's stop debating that. And the fact that people then use this to decry or undermine, and then therefore cast off people like myself and your colleague, my colleague Sean Carlton, who's doing
Right.
incredible work,
Right.
fighting denialism, residential school denialism. People who say, "Oh, those schools were fantastic places," or those schools were places that good things happened more than bad things.
Right.
Whatever. The fact is, children died. Period. Let's stop debating that.
Right. I feel like right away, right off the cuff, we're talking about denialism, right? And I feel like that's really leading to um my next question about, the colonial narrative, right? So how have people's perceptions been created? How has denialism really been created in essence from this colonial narrative that has really um, moved away from the truth, talking about these atrocities, because Canadian history really hasn't focused at all on the truth of what has happened to Indigenous people in this country. So can you speak to this a bit?
Yeah, oh, for sure. I mean, absolutely. Um, just a few, I can't remember, months ago, it might have been a year ago now. Former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien was on the news. I don't know why he decided he needed to speak about this. It may have been some anniversary or something. Um, I mean, you've spoken enough, and now we all have to continue to listen to you. But anyways, he came out and said, "Oh, I never heard about abuses in residential school." The guy was the prime minister for three
Right.
terms, and MPs immediately came out, like Charlie Angus and other MPs said, Romeo Saganash came out and said, absolutely, we were talking about abuses. Like, were you not
Right.
listening, or did you not see the mail that was sent to you, or the numerous times that the Royal Commission, which was during your government, talked
Right.
about that? Like, did you just ignore all of that?
Mm-hmm.
That tells you a basic truth. There is a basic truth in those who are my age and maybe we'll say 35 and above. You can get to the highest power echelon status in this country. You can be celebrated, you can be rewarded, you can be given all of this incredible privilege by simply being ignorant, by
Right.
simply being a person who refuses to engage with, read about, or acknowledge the truth. You can actually get to the highest office in the land. And that's a good example, I think, of what tells you that there is a flagrant and foundational ignorance in the country that celebrates more ignorance.
Right.
When we say ignorance, that means that it might not always be willful. Like it might not always be something that I would agree to say that people my age or 35 years and above were probably never taught residential schools, probably didn't learn about basic truths involving Canada. I used to do a lecture about my grade 6 textbook with my students. It's a bit of an outdated
Me
lecture now.
too.
I don't do it too much anymore. But I used to do a lecture where I used to go through my grade 6 textbook in front of my students and say, "This is what I learned. I
Yeah.
I learned basically that three things. I learned that Indigenous peoples loved uh, non-native people, or they were basically a bunch of savage nomads before white people arrived. And then when white people arrived, they loved them. They were so happy that white people showed up, and
Hmm.
and they were just sort of gave everything over and went, oh, we're just going to retreat to the reserves willfully.
Right.
Third is when things like the train line happened, Indigenous peoples loved it. They were like, yay, thank God civilization showed up. That's basically what I learned in school about Native people.
Right.
All of those are lies. And so they're none of
Outright.
those are truths. If there are truths, they are so minimal. It's like picking, like for instance, the story about the train line. You can't just pick one Indigenous person who allowed train lines on their territory and so, oh well, that's proof that Indigenous peoples are absolutely consenting to the invasion and the mistreatment of them on their own lands.
Right.
And that's what my grade 6 textbook did. Anyways, so my point is that there is this kind of willful ignorance that then is the embodiment. But this generation, so I happen to be a parent, and I have a parent of an 18-year-old. And so I've been able to have a front row seat to this generation. And everybody 35 and below, 40 and below, like this generation that came just after me is the most competent generation in history on the issue of Indigenous peoples, contributions to Canada, Indigenous contributions to Canada, and then also the ways in which Indigenous knowledge can contribute something or is already contributed things
Right.
or will contribute in the future to what is the most pressing and critical issues in this country, and most importantly for continuing our communities, our nations, our sovereignties. So I'm lucky that I got this front row seat because it gives me tremendous hope in that change is coming from those who are, yeah, yes, in younger positions. They aren't in the power positions yet.
Right.
Um, yeah, I'm not to insult you, Tammy, but you're in that group. You're in that leadership
What
group.
do you mean? Insult me.
What I
Thank
mean
you. I'm glad.
is that I think that your generation and the people that we work with, your colleagues, people who come just after me, I like to think of myself as trying to just open the door a bit wider so that more people are coming
Right.
in. My dad was the first in the room.
Yeah.
My job is to try to get as many people in the room as possible. And I think that your generation and my daughter's generation, you're going to make whole new rooms, and
Right.
you're gonna be the revolutionaries that this world needs. And I used to think of my generation like that, but I think in many ways that my generation are really brokering what is the most competent generation in history, the most incredible, knowledgeable people who both have traditional knowledge and then also know how to use Google Documents, which
Right.
I'm not quite versed on.
I'm not great. I'm with you on that.
But
Technology is not my friend.
And so that makes me excited. But here's the problem, of course, is that we have this huge body of people in the country who are very powerful, who are
Hmm.
older, and they are spreading lies and
Right.
the ignorances. At the best, they're spreading the ignorance that they themselves were taught. At the worst,
Right.
they're continuing the status quo to maintain the power position of certain races and genders in this country. And the evidence of that, and not to give a brutal example, but this is the example that I've written about in the newspaper. My colleague Sean Carlton alerted me to this. Um, on the admitted serial killer's computer, Jeremy Skibecki, who we know
Right.
murdered four Indigenous women, probably maybe more, but potentially, according to the trial that's come out now, and different DNA that's been found in his apartment.
Right.
Uh, on his computer, he was not just spreading white supremacy on his social media, but he was spreading residential school denialism that was being fed by very powerful people, former professors, former ministers of justice, and ministers of governments. And
Right.
the fact is that he was spreading hate that is perpetrated openly by very powerful men in society, for the most part, men, anyways. A woman quickly came to mind there, but um, and so as a result, it tells you that those very powerful people who want to maintain the status quo and celebrate anti-Indigenous hate, uh, and particularly residential school denialism, meaning denying what basic people say about residential school who were there, uh, then it turns into violence,
Right.
and innate horrific violence. It has outcomes.
So I wanted to go back to, you're talking about this new generation, right? So you're talking about the historical narrative that, I mean, as you've outlined, is very much still alive and well. Um, the conversation that you heard in school, the conversation that I've heard in school, um, leading into this new generation where we do see like this huge influx of people who are wanting to spread truth now, right? But we're still seeing these instances. We're still seeing this, and as you mentioned, willful ignorance. So how are we going to reconcile that tension? How are we going to reconcile the tension between, this true historical evidence and public perception?
So there's the subtle ways. Like I've been a person for my whole career, is my whole life. I'm a person who grew up in a town in which visiting was the way that you spent time with people,
Right.
even people you deeply disagreed. You shared food. You went to the Legion and went to the meat draws on a
Right.
Friday afternoon.
The Legion.
Um,
We're Manitobans.
like I grew up in a community in which we were doing reconciliation far before reconciliation was even a topic. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
Selkirk, Manitoba. So it's the birthplace of the Red River Métis on the Red River. It's also right near Lower Fort Garry, and so we've got with the former site of Peguis First Nation, the original site of Peguis First Nation. And then so where I grew up, and then there's all these settlers who then come in and join with our families: Scottish, French, German, Icelandic, uh, all different races. And then these days
Right.
now, Mandarin, Ukraine, all these different people that come into our communities and our
Right.
families. My best friend was Ukrainian growing up, and him and he votes completely differently than I do. Like he is a person who supports a party I would never support,
Right.
but I love him with all of my heart. He is my
Right.
number one friend, and he will be my number one friend until I die, because he is the person he's my person. And
Right.
he's a guy that I love so innately. He's a Ukrainian guy, and like I said, like I would do anything for this person, and yet we don't agree politically on anything. Um, and he knows what I do, and I know what he does, and that doesn't mean that we don't love each other. And that's what
Right.
Selkirk that was Selkirk was like. And the reason what we bonded over was playing sport together, was going to parties together in high school, and probably
Right.
most of all laughing together. We
Right.
we laughed at the same shows, the same jokes, the same stories. We still tell each other. Well, he still can make me laugh more than anybody in the world.
Nice.
So here's my point. My point is that those are the things that will change the most perception. Those relationships that
Right.
go through time and food and generosity.
Right.
Because there's nothing that's better in the world than making somebody laugh. There's nothing that brings more peace, justice. That's why our best and most insightful people are the funniest people. They're the people who tell us the most truth. They're the funniest.
Right.
Because the truth hurts, but it also makes us laugh, because we know that when we laugh a lot, it feels a little bit uncomfortable.
Right.
And But sometimes you got to be brave, and sometimes you got to stand up, and creation presents you with these moments. And I'll give you one moment as an example. Um, our now premier, Wab Canoe, who is a good friend of mine. He's been a family friend for a long time. I've known him since he's a little boy. I actually think he's the first wave of the generation that I've been speaking about, because he's quite a bit, well, not quite a bit, but it's considerably younger than me, enough that it's noticeable. And so he is a minister or no, he was in the opposition seat. He was the leader of the opposition. And it wasn't a moment in the legislature, but the then Minister of Indigenous Reconciliation, I think it was called, his name was Alan Lajmodier, and he was appointed by
Mhm.
Premier Brian Pallister in the Conservative government after the previous minister sort of resigned in a deep disagreement with the premier. On his very first speech, he was asked about residential schools, and he started spreading falsehoods. He started saying residential schools, people meant well. Residential schools was intended to be good.
Right,
That residential schools, all those who ran those schools, had a broader, more better purpose, and we should all be talking about that more than we should be talking about the violence. Those are lies, and those are not true, because there was no
right,
good intention in residential schools. And if you just look at a few things, one is the way they were built. They were built to basically like prisons. So
right,
that there was no willful kindness there. They were also chronically underfunded. The churches misused the money to build their own missions, and that means starving children. That means there's no argument that there was
right,
goodness there. And there was no education until 1948. So it was slave institutions. People were basically enslaved, and then they were operating and making money for the school, selling things in town, working for farms because they
right,
were slaves, working 14 hours a day. That's the slave system. That's what we would never say. The African slave trade in cotton plantations, oh, there were some good parts to it. We
right,
never say that. But anyways,
right,
people say that about residential schools. So the minister comes out and says that. In that moment is an opportunity, and it's uncomfortable, and it's not something that a lot of us want to do. Like, I didn't sign up to be Mr. Public, put my body in harm's way, put my reputation in harm's way, go on TV and be the rabble rouser, troublemaker, whatever. But you
right,
have to be brave, and that's what our
right,
ancestors have always wanted us to do, which is that there's a reason that we have that term ogichita in our language, and it
right,
means to have a big heart. uh, that Ogichita, Oda, heart, Gitcha, big. And so, like, when you are an Ogichita, a person in our culture who has a big heart, also in English, which is a terrible word that's converted means warrior, but when you are a
right,
person who steps up for our people, you have to step up with the tools that you have. And so in that moment, Wab Kinew said, first thing that he said was, as an honorary witness of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, by the commission, who said, when you witness what the survivor said, you then have to stand up for them. You have to
right,
stand up. And he said that. He didn't say, I'm the leader of the opposition. He didn't say, I'm an MLA. He didn't even say, I'm a Anishinaabe. What he said was, as an honorary witness of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I have to disagree with you. And he did it in front of all the cameras, in front of all the media that was there, in front of the
right,
public. It was broadcast online. And he said, you are incorrect, sir. You are not spreading the truths of what took place at those schools. And it's hard, man, because everybody then lambasted him. Everybody said, oh, that was inappropriate. The premier came out and said that's not appropriate. I mean, it was like the welcome speech, and you just embarrassed the minister. The fact is that you have to step up when the opportunity arises.
right,
I don't care if, like, I'm also strategic, right? Like, I don't expect students to put their body on the line in a situation where there's immense power and they're going to suffer.
right,
If they want to, then you got to realize that there is certain things that will happen. And I want students to succeed and graduate. So I'm like, be strategic. Like, we can't change the whole institution overnight.
right, right,
But there are times when we have to step up for each other, and we all have to step up when a person that we know that was being brave and we believe. So what I did was I stood up for WAB. I stood up for,
right,
I said, I said what he did was exactly what he was asked to do by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He wasn't doing it as the opposition. He wasn't doing it even as an Anishinaabe person. The fact is that then we have to step up for each other. And that's where I think the real rubber hits the road, as the saying goes, is that we see instances of bravery, but do we stand up for each other in that moment?
Right.
And that's one of the hardest things right now, which because it's very hard to uh, navigate this issue involving the Middle East. And many of our relatives are stepping up and standing up, and I feel for people who I feel for them honestly. On there are a few Anishinaabe people who are supportive of what Israel's doing. I, of course, don't ever condone the death of children, and
Right.
so I certainly don't condone the actions of Hamas on October 7th. That was horrific, and I want Hamas to not be in charge of Palestine. But at the same time, it's a very difficult situation, and it's a situation where you see people on both sides. From our people,
Right.
it's hard. It's very hard because I think they both think they're being brave, and it's I never like to see our people fighting amongst themselves, even if they are from different political stripes and wings.
Right.
Um, I think we are stronger when we can find ways to visit and have food, all the things I did in Selkirk. Visit with each other and make each other laugh and ultimately talk.
Right. I think it's important when you're talking about like current genocides, right? Because that really brings us back to, again, this historical narrative and the fact that, even what has happened to Indigenous people has not really been positioned as genocide. As we know, um, the findings of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission reports was genocide, right? Cultural genocide. And so when we're thinking about these acts of genocide, I wanted you to kind of outline how those acts of genocide are still very current, still connected to Indigenous people and where we're at today, because oftentimes this narrative talks in the historical context, right? In the past. So can we speak a little bit about that?
Yeah. Um, I think you pointed out something really important, and I want your listeners and everybody in the public to know. So I always talk about this. In fact, I probably should write about this more, but the Truth and Reconciliation Commission found that Canada committed cultural genocide during the residential school period. Now, there's a reason why they use that language, and I happen to, of course, as you know, have an inside knowledge of how everything
Right.
was there. I mean, my father was in the head of it. The reason that they used the term cultural genocide was that the Canadian government, who at the time was holding very tightly to budgetary constraints,
Right.
and there was a lack of funding for the last elements, the last steps of the TRC,
Right.
was I wouldn't say threatening, but I would just say they were in a position in which they were not supportive of the term genocide to be used for a residential school. It was the government of Stephen Harper. And if you remember
Really.
what was happening at the time, the Canadian Museum of Human Rights, the CEO, who was named Stuart Murray, former head of the Conservative Party of Manitoba, he used the term genocide when describing in an op-ed with my father in the Globe and Mail or Toronto Star, I can't remember, one of those newspapers, and was then fired. He wasn't fired. He was actually, his contract wasn't renewed, but
Right.
that's the kind of power that word has. And the TRC used the term cultural genocide because that is absolute. There's no argument there. Was culture under threat and was culture sought to be eradicated? Yes, absolutely. The debate is over genocide is was there a mental intent to murder and kill children?
Right.
Uh, and so in the churches at the time, I think some still do, argued that there was no mental intent. There was a physical intent, but no mental intent. Physical intent like starvation, but there was no mental intent. We didn't mean it. We didn't mean to hurt anybody.
Right.
Um, that, of course, argument, as I just pointed out a minute ago, is just false and not true.
Right.
Why would you make children work 14 hours a day unless you were intending to harm them?
Right.
So, so my point of it is that you would never have gotten the use of the word genocide in the Murder Miss Indigenous Women and Girls report later when
Right.
the Pope Francis recognizes that residential schools are genocide. Nowadays, we use genocide. The Prime Minister has recognized that what's happening with Indigenous peoples, in particular the women, girls, two-spirit people, is genocide.
Right.
You would have never gotten that if the TRC wasn't strategic.
Mm-hmm.
The TRC had to be strategic in that moment. They couldn't go for the whole, they couldn't put all their chips in the middle and say,
Right.
oh, it's a genocide, because they would have been not funded. They would have probably suffered their last 6 months. They may not have got the reports that we got. And then you would never open the doorway for other people to come in and make that argument. And therefore now we, I think, are much more open to it. I wouldn't say it's universal across the country, but the Prime Minister recognizes that genocides happen. So here's my point of that. What I'm trying to say is that you have to be strategic. You have to, as our people have always done, be savvy, be creative.
Right.
And we have to get change done. We have to navigate and move and sometimes dance and sometimes sing and sometimes tell a story, to get all of that work done. And so that's how we start telling the truth. That's why we
Right.
need the artists. That's why we need the poets. That's why we need the hip hop singers and rappers. And that's why we need absolutely podcasts like you, something outside of the mainstream sort of legacy media. But I work for mainstream legacy media, so I do,
Mm-hmm.
I think we need them too, but we
Right.
desperately need people like yourself who are innovative and creative and do a thing like this podcast, to be able to navigate and be strategic and talk about these really critical issues.
So you're talking about, again, building relationships. I'm starting to see a theme because you're talking about building relationships. You're talking about, and I mean, I feel like moving towards where we're going to end here is we're going to talk more about reconciliation. But I'm thinking about how can we get the information that's already there out to people, right? The first episode, what we did was I went out onto Portage Avenue and I polled Canadians to see how many people had actually read these reports. Because for myself, as an Indigenous person who's largely impacted by these issues, that's where the information is, right? These are legal documents. These are essentially stating this is what has happened. So how can we get those reports out to people? How can people know about this? I had one individual who said that they didn't even know what these reports were, and they stated, I've never heard of these before. I think the larger issue is having access to them. And so, with that being said, what do you feel, or how significant do you feel it is to try to continue to connect people to the reports, to the 94 calls to action? Essentially in addressing, genocide against Indigenous people and impacts of colonization.
So I've done frontline work on poverty and homelessness and addictions for about 30 years now. So I started when I was 18. So I'm 48 now. And when I was 18 years old, I decided that I wanted to work in Winnipeg's center core. And I worked for service agencies. I worked in a crisis unit. I worked in a mobile crisis unit. I worked with people with mental health who live outside. There wasn't a lot of encampments in those days,
Right.
but there was a lot of people who were sleeping outside in bus shelters, and then they were going to other shelters, mostly Christian run shelters. And anyways, so the reason I tell you that is because for 30 years, I've experienced what happens when a community forgets its most marginalized.
Right.
When a world mistreats a group of people for a long period of time and then raises their hands up in the air and says, "What's happening here? We don't understand what's happened." And
Right.
and uh like the it's angering. If you don't try to just realize this is a marathon, not a sprint, and you can get really angry and get really depressed. And one of the reasons that I left work in the downtown core back in 1998, and actually started working overseas in Sri Lanka with people who are suffering from the marginalization from the civil war in that place, which were women, um, is because I was so depressed. I was deeply, deeply traumatized by the fact that all these people were suffering in the downtown core.
Hmm.
All of them were indigenous, with the exception of a few people here and there. And those were usually people who are disabled or people who had been just so disenfranchised by their families because they were gay or lesbian or queer.
Hmm.
Um, just it was insane. It's insane to me how people leave people behind and then like intentionally put them into harm and then wonder why they're in harm. It's just it blows my mind. And so anyway, so I had to take some time off because it was very hard. And when I came back to that work, I've seen the chronic continuance of that. So what I've learned is that if people don't understand that they're a part of that they created the problem, we have to point that out to them. But we also have to point them out that they can be part of the solution. And that is the key. That's the magic solution. That's the magic. In my 30 years of working, that's the only thing I know. The only thing I know is that um, people generally uh, are good, and if you appeal to their goodness and show them that they can be good and that they're not just bad because they've done ABCD that's created this problem. And every
Right.
Canadian has participated in genocide. Every Canadian has taken a part in that, whether consciously or not, whether through their ancestor or through their current work. All of us, for example, we all have universities that we work in, institutions that have supported us, that we maybe got money for scholarships, or we have investments in banks. All of us have a bank account, or we shop at a store where the thing that we buy in our very hand was produced from genocide.
Right.
I mean, every person in their pocket from cell phones. Sorry, I forgot that it's a podcast. Sorry, I was holding up a cell phone there. Um, the when we hold that cell phone in their hand, people died for that. People were
Right.
murdered for that
Right.
item in your hand, so that you could have it at a cheap price. So you may not think it's cheap, but like it's at a very the reason that it's affordable to you is because people were murdered, lands were taken,
Right.
resources were stolen. So what I'm trying to say is that we're all complicit in like we none of us, even indigenous peoples, get to throw up our hands and go, oh, we're the good ones. No, we
Right.
all participate in violence. We all participate in genocide. So that means that we have to recognize that. We have to own that. We have to then decide how we're going to act as a result of that knowledge. And that's where the goodness enters. That's where we have an opportunity. So here's what I do. So I've worked with the Mama Bear Clan now for a number of years, and so we did. I started work in 2019. I've taken some time off here and there to do some other things, but I'm still continuing. I'm going for a walk this Friday, in fact, or next Friday, sorry. And so we do community patrols, we take care of people, we intervene in situations of uh, children being lost and domestic issues and help with people who are addictions, whatever. All those things that we do, and we show love. That's the most important thing. But here's
Right.
what I have introduced in my work, and I've encouraged all the captains to do the same thing because I think this is where the revolution can be found. Every time we do our work, I always tell everybody because I started to notice that when we're walking through Main Street, when we're doing work in Point Douglas, when we're at the Thunderbird House, there was like hundreds of cars just driving by us, zooming by, boom, 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 boom. And people generally don't look at us. I think because they're ashamed. They're ashamed that they're not doing anything. And they see that people from uh, all areas who look like them are wearing vests, are carrying sandwiches, are giving out water, are helping people stand up, are intervening when it comes to the situations involving security and safety, showing love.
Right.
But what I do now is I intentionally do this is I wave at every single car that I have a moment to. Every single car, I wave at people. And when their windows open, I say, how are you guys doing? Hey, you guys can come volunteer. Why don't you guys come out one night? And I always make sure that people know that there's always people who love them too, and that this is their work. This is their city, and as much as it is mine, and that all of us can be a part of this solution. And I'm not looking for philanthropy because I think philanthropy is inherently colonial. It's we don't need pennies and crumbs from rich people that can just be tossed down the line. What we need is we need people to show up and engage and invest. Like, and what I mean investment is like give a relationship. That's what I want. I want people who can help and build and work with. And if I can just give one plug, I think the owner of the Winnipeg Jets is one of those people. I think Mark Chipman has helped to build a shelter.
Mhm.
He's done drives at Jets games. He's also walked with us. And I don't always agree with some of the things that he may have done with how he thinks people can get out of poverty. The Gonzaga school has been very controversial as something that, driving, sort of, I don't think it's a good idea to pick up just a couple people and then put them into an elite school somewhere in the
Mhm.
city. That's the Gonzaga program. I don't think that's a great move. I think what we need to invest in the community, help people to stay and work with and build the infrastructure there. But I think that's just different ways to see the work that's necessary. I think that
Right.
people, I have a daughter who's about to go to the University of Ottawa. Am I proud that she's going to one of the better schools in the country? Absolutely. I'm very happy that she's doing that. She's going to get great opportunity, learn great skill, but I want her to come home. I want her to work here.
Mhm.
I want her to
Mhm.
come and bring her skills home. I
Right.
hope that she does that. I can't control her life. And so that being said, is our job in our lives, I think, is to show people solutions.
Right.
Part of that solution, when you were out on the street there, I think it's wonderful that you talk to people and maybe discover that people didn't know. That actually doesn't surprise me in any way. That's kind of like
Me neither.
a duh moment where I'm like, yeah, well, obviously there's not going to be people who hear about the TRC. But well, here's what I'm interested about that what that activity produced. I'm interested what happened when that person went home.
And that's what I found was
And then
that I had such a positive response of I need to do more.
yeah, I like when a person goes home and then says, "Hey, I met this person who obviously cares deeply.
Mhm.
Is a young person who's clearly doing some important work, and a person who brought this thing to my attention. I want to know what they Googled that night, or I want to know like what did they then think about the next day at
Mhm.
work, maybe talk over coffee with their colleague, because that's where the work is. Because
Right.
I don't think I'm going to convince everybody when I wave to them that this is their work, but I am
Right.
convincing them that they need to see that they have to
Right.
see that there are people, or a small group of people, who are saving lives in the city, who are working their butt off to try to make every part of this city, and particularly the most marginalized areas, better and safer, and a place where people can love and care about each other. Um, and most importantly, is that that's their work too. I
Right.
want them to see that work as theirs,
Right.
and that's what I hope that we do through kindness and generosity, and sometimes through I think we also do that through our marches and through slowing traffic down to our
Right.
in Maine, because we all need to pause for a moment and realize when the Wet'suwet'en are being arrested on standing
Right.
on their own land over
Right.
their a conflict over governance that's been created by Canada. We all need to see that when those who are murdered in the Middle East, and I don't care if those are Israelis or if there's Palestinians, we have to pause. We have to think
Mhm.
about it and go, what does that mean? Like, what does it mean? And how do we make sure that babies are not dying and mothers are not dying and two-spirit people are not dying?
Right.
Because we are all lesser than every single time somebody dies, especially those who are the most richest, and those are our two-spirit peoples. Those are
Right.
our the grandmothers and the aunties and the mothers. These are the people who give us the most,
Right.
people who are always there for us, especially our children.
Right.
So that's my point, is that it's we have to be better, and I'm not perfect. I've made lots of mistakes in my life. I'm never a person to wag a finger and not see the three fingers pointed back at me.
Right.
uh, so I need to be better, and others need to be better too.
Just amazing words, Niigaan. It does look like we have run out of time, but I did want to leave a few minutes for you to just kind of close us off on your idea of really shifting to accomplishing reconciliation. Did you want to leave us with a few words on how we're going to get there?
Well, uh, I'll give one shameless
Inspire
promotion.
inspiring words for our listeners. Final thought.
I don't really ever have anything inspiring. My worst, all my talks, people frequently say that the worst thing is my ending. My endings are brutal, but I will say this. Like I have a book coming out, and it's about Winnipeg, and I think Winnipeg's been characterized as the city full of racism and violence, and we get called
Hmm.
Winnipeg and all this kind of stuff, and it's gotten even worse because of the serial killer trial that's been taking place and the issue of the landfill and the fact that a premier ran an entire election campaign based on not searching for Indigenous
Right.
women and girls. So Manitoba and Winnipeg can get some rough rides, and I think that the national media across Canada goes and they like to wag their finger at Winnipeg and go, "Ha ha ha! See, look, they're the most racist city in the galaxy." Um, and we are not. We are the inheritor of Canada's racism, and we've been at this the longest. Uh,
Right.
we are the first step of after Confederation. We have inherited the most and the longest policies of racism, the Indian Act, and there's Treaty One and Treaty Two. All of those things are shaped innately by those first steps of colonialism in Canada,
Hmm.
um, which took place in the East, but really took foothold in the West, in the prairies, in Manitoba, particularly. Saskatchewan, of course, the Civil War in Saskatchewan, the immense genocide against the Métis and the Cree.
Right.
Um, all of those things that took place, all of these things in the prairies that are really important to talk about. But Winnipeg has something special going on. There's something unique, and it's not just the Mama Bear Clan, although that's a good example of it. There's a humongous explosion of artists, writers, dancers. There was just, for instance, the other day, a strap dress ceremony at Manitowoc, the powwow
Right.
that was restarted by my sister and Joanne Soldier, who brought back this dance that is a empowerment dance for Anishinaabe and for the women in our community who need that remaking, that reinvestment, that rediscovery of that really important ceremony and dance. Really beautiful, like just made my heart sing.
Hmm.
I thought. And then there's that happens almost every day. Like there's like an economic forum, there's an identity forum, there's a huge trade show for Indigenous employment for youth, like in Winnipeg,
Right.
downtown core, all the time. There's people who volunteer tens of thousands of dollars, invest their own money to help people be warm in minus 40-degree weather.
Right.
And that's Amic, and that's EJ Fontaine and Eva Fontaine.
They've
EJ
been guests.
to become
Mhm.
chief of his community, and I think it's because there's these moments that we have of opportunity where we need to be brave and stand up for something, and then also stand up for each other. And those moments happen all the time. They happen all the
Right.
time. And I hope what we do as professors in and you'll you've been exposed to that. You've also been a part of academia. I hope that we do a little bit of that as well for each other in the
Hmm.
institution. The university can be a very difficult place for Indigenous people to navigate. But I also think that my hope is that we do that when we raise our children, and that what we do is we invest them in with bravery,
Right.
and that we stand up for them, and that we invest ourselves in giving them all the things necessary to live a traditional life, but live a life also in a world in which they're going to be followed in the 7-Eleven. They're going to be experience that racism when they go to a university audition,
Right.
and also going to be able to be standing on their own and witness racism in a city that might be outside of Winnipeg. And what are they going to do then? How can they be strategic, but then also live according to their values? In case you
Right.
haven't noticed, I'm really talking about my daughter there. All of that's about
Hmm. Right.
I've tried my best to prepare her to face off against a world that's going to not want her gifts, but then also how she can find people that will help her, that will stand with her, that she can have bravery, and that I'll always be there with her mother to be able to say that she matters. And that's my hope. And that's my hope, is that those who listen to your podcast, those who work with people like yourself, that I hope that you see those who have come before you as trying their best. They're not perfect, making lots of
Right.
mistakes. There's lots of things that I'm very angry at my father about. Well, the biggest thing being, I don't think we should just parent the country. I think we should also parent our own children. Uh,
Right.
and so lots of things I'm angry at my father about. And I sure would have liked if he came to a soccer game in my life. I sure would have liked it if he didn't just worry about churches and he worried about my sisters and my life. And I think our generation maybe learned a little bit, and hopefully we do a little bit better. We're not perfect. I've certainly made
Mm.
lots of mistakes, and I've certainly not. I'm no barometer of perfection. I'll tell you that much. And then my hope is that your generation can then learn from us, and that you can navigate this world strategically with bravery, and that you can do the work that you're necessary to do in your life. And uh, because we'll be watching when I'm in my old age and cheering you on as you then raise the next generation.
Well, we have good leaders. I think that's why we've been doing a good job, is because we have great, amazing leaders like you, Niigaan. So thank you so much for the work that you do. I do want to plug your book one more time. Winnipeg. It is dropping on May 30th of 2024. Where can they find it? Chapters?
Uh, McNally Robinson. I'm a big supporter of
Okay,
independent, but I was at Chapters the other night, and there was a bunch of copies there too. So if you go to Chapter,
amazing.
any of those places are great. Indigo is also available too. So.
Okay, and online? I'm
Good Minds, go to Good Minds, but you can go directly to the publisher Penguin Random House or McClelland and Stewart.
Amazing. Okay, well, thank you so much, Niigaan, for being here with me and your inspiring words. Thanks again, Niigaan.
Yeah, Miigwech, thanks so much. Take care of yourself.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for tuning in. This has been Tammy Wolf. You're listening to Truth Before Reconciliation. Kiitam kumapamitin. Hope you come back and listen to us again next time.